She tried to sell her sister's son. The mountain cowboy said, "Keep it, and keep me too." The sun beat down on the dusty auction yard with the kind of merciless clarity that made every flaw show, and Mara stood in the center, clutching the squirming bundle tighter against her chest, breath shallow, hair matted to her temples, eyes darting at passing men who pretended not to hear her trembling voice. The child, no more than 9 months old, whimpered softly, unaware of the shame unraveling around him. She didn't stand on the selling platform, didn't shout a price, didn't hold up the baby like livestock. It was worse, quieter, a whispered negotiation in the open daylight as she cornered travelers one by one, saying, "He ain't safe with me. Just take him, please." And each man stiffened, muttered excuses about wives or long journeys, and walked off fast, too afraid to look like a monster by agreeing, and too selfish to help by refusing kindly. Mara pressed the baby's forehead to her shoulder, whispering, "I'm sorry, Jonah. I can't keep you safe. I ain't your mama. She's gone. I ain't enough." Her voice breaking as she tugged the thin shawl around him tighter. Her dress hung loose, shoes cracked, hands shaking not from cruelty but hunger and months of travel that had hollowed her out. The yard fell oddly silent when one man finally stopped. A ranch hand with a grease-stained vest and coin pouch clinking at his hip. Eyeing the baby like a purchase, not a soul, licking his teeth as he said, $2. I'll take the brat off your hands." Mara flinched, backing away, clutching Jonah tighter, torn between relief and disgust. Her lips parted to answer when a shadow cut across them both, tall and wide enough to blot out the sun. A man stepped forward from the hitching post, broad shoulders beneath a rough wool coat, beard thick, hat low, boots caked with mud from trails no map cared about. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at the ranch hand, then at Mara, then at the baby with an expression that wasn't pity. It was recognition. The ranch hand grunted, "Mind your step, stranger. Woman's making a deal." The giant cowboy's voice carried like distant thunder rolling off pine cliffs. "No, she's drownin'." Mara blinked, stunned, heat flushing her cheeks, shame battling fury. "I'm not trying to—" "Sell him?" the ranch hand scoffed. "Sure looks like it." Murmurs rippled through bystanders. Hungry eyes always gathered when sins were public. Mara's throat closed, hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the shawl. "He's my sister's boy," she whispered. "She died in the fire. Men followed us. I can't keep him safe. I ain't choosing this." The ranch hand smirked. "World don't care why. Just cares that you're willin'." The cowboy stepped closer, coat brushing the dirt, jaw tightening, and when he finally spoke, it was to Mara alone, voice low, steady, cutting the noise around them like a blade. "If you're giving him up to survive, that means you still care if he lives." His gaze hardened, locking onto hers. "So keep him, and keep me too." The yard went silent. No laughter, no mockery, just the sudden shift in air when a man draws a line that others didn't know was present. Mara stared, breath caught, torn between disbelief and anger at the mercy being thrown at her feet. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me. You don't know him." The cowboy didn't break eye contact. "I know what it looks like when someone tries to survive without a place to stand." The ranch hand scoffed again, but backed away when the cowboy's posture shifted. Not threatening, just immovably present. Jonah reached upward with small fingers, brushing the cowboy's coat. The giant didn't move away. Mara's voice cracked, barely audible. "I don't deserve that kind of help." He shook his head. "Help ain't about deserving. It's about need." And with the sun blazing above them like judgment itself, the world shifted. Not because the baby was saved, but because someone finally refused to let shame decide the future. The crowd didn't linger long after the cowboy's words settled into dust. Shame makes people scatter fast, especially when mercy challenges the cruelty they were ready to watch unfold, and soon only hoofprints, thrown looks, and wind cutting through the empty auction yard remained. Mara stood frozen, Jonah crying softly against her shoulder, while the giant cowboy tugged loose his horse's reins and motioned gently, not commanding, just offering direction. "We can't stay here. Folks will talk, and talk turns to men with badges." She hesitated, body rigid, instinct torn between running and collapsing. "You just showed up," she said quietly. "You don't carry the consequences." He met her stare with something steady. "I've carried worse." Without waiting for approval, he turned toward the back trail behind the smithy, a narrow path leading into open country, scrub grass whispering in the heat, trusting she would follow. And she did, though her steps were uneven and her mind screamed with every footfall that taking help from strangers is how women end up chained to worse fates than hunger. After 100 yards, he slowed his horse and offered his hand to help her mount. She shook her head. "I can walk." The cowboy studied her for a moment, then nodded once, respecting the refusal. "Name's Calder Boone," he said as they walked. Mara didn't answer at first, gripping the baby tighter, jaw set. "Mara," she finally murmured. "He's Jonah." The name lodged in Boone's chest like something sacred, and though he didn't say it, his posture changed, as if names made the world harder to abandon. The trail wound toward the hills, away from the town's sagging fences and toward wild grass that swayed in long silver waves. Jonah started fussing, rooting against Mara's collarbone. Boone noticed. "He hungry?" "Always," she muttered, exhaustion leaking through. She stopped, adjusting shawl and bottle, hands shaking from lack of food. Boone untied a canteen from his saddle and knelt without ceremony, pouring clean water into a tin cup, setting it beside her like a peace offering. Mara stared at it a long time before whispering, "I wasn't going to sell him for drink money or nothing wicked. I got no milk left, no coin, no kin." Boone leaned against a boulder, arms crossed. "You don't owe me your reasons." "Maybe not," she said, eyes locked on Jonah, "but I owe him a better one." Wind whipped her hair across her face. And when she brushed it aside, Boone noticed the bruised shadow beneath her left eye, fading yellow, not fresh. "Who hurt you?" he asked. Mara stiffened. "Doesn't matter. It matters if they come looking." Her silence answered louder than words. Boone looked down the trail toward the town they'd left behind. "Someone will try to claim him again," he said. "Man like that ranch hand wasn't just curious. He expected no one to stop him." Mara flinched. "I know." Boone stepped closer, voice dropping. "I meant what I said. You keep the boy. I'll stand between him and anyone who tries to take what ain't theirs." She looked up sharply, anger flashing. "Why? You think I'm some fragile thing needs protectin'?" "No," Boone replied, eyes steady. "I think you're someone who's been protecting yourself for too long without help." Mara's breath hitched, not because she agreed, but because the words felt like someone finally saw the battle she'd been losing quietly for months. Jonah finished feeding and settled against her chest, tiny hand clinging to fabric. Boone turned to his horse again. "There's a creek a mile ahead. Safer place to rest." Mara hesitated, then followed, steps slow but deliberate. The sun glowed warm on their backs as they left the town behind, and though nothing truly changed yet, no promises, no home, no safety, there was a shift in the air, a fragile space where survival no longer felt like her burden alone. And for the first time since the fire took her sister, Mara didn't feel like she was running from the world. She felt like someone might finally be walking with her. By the time they reached the creek, the sun had shifted high overhead, turning the water into a ribbon of silver that cut through soft grass and willow shade, a place that felt too gentle for a world as harsh as theirs. Mara knelt beside the bank, easing Jonah into her lap, while Boone loosened his saddle cinch and let his horse drink, the quiet gurgle of water filling the spaces where fear usually lived. She dipped a corner of her shawl into the creek, wringing cool drops over the baby's neck to soothe the heat, whispering, "There you go, little one." Voice still shaky, but more present than it had been since dawn. Boone watched without staring, leaning against a stone, hands resting loosely on his knees, close enough to intervene if trouble came, distant enough not to crowd her. Mara could feel his silence, heavy and patient. A kind of company she wasn't used to. Most men filled quiet with demands, questions, claims. He offered nothing but room to breathe. "I never wanted to give him away," she finally said, eyes on the water instead of Boone. "But every mile since the fire, it felt like he belonged to someone stronger than me." Boone's jaw flexed. "Belongin' ain't about strength, it's about stayin'." Mara shook her head, water dripping from her fingers. "Maybe for you. You look like you never ran from anything in your life." Boone huffed a short breath that wasn't quite laughter. "I ran from everything. Difference is the world kept running with me." She finally looked over, narrowing her eyes. "That's supposed to mean something?" "Means trouble don't stop just because you choose a good reason," he said simply. "Only stops when you choose a good place." The words settled into her like stones sinking through deep water. She hadn't chosen places, only escaped them. Jonah cooed softly and reached toward Boone with tiny fingers, curious, unafraid. Boone didn't touch him, just leaned forward so the baby could brush his coat, that same steady warmth from earlier returning as if Jonah recognized something safe. "You talk like a preacher," Mara said quietly. "I ain't righteous enough for preachin'." "Then why say things like that?" Boone looked out across the field, wind lifting the dust in slow spirals. "Because you're holding the boy like he might vanish, and he ain't going anywhere." The words struck harder than she wanted them to, throat tightening like a fist around old grief. Mara pulled in a shaky breath. "I watched my sister burn," she confessed, voice raw. "She screamed for me to take him, and I did, but I couldn't save her. Some part of me thinks if I let him go, I ain't failing her anymore." Boone didn't move, didn't soften with pity. "You think losing someone means you owe the world the pieces they left behind." Mara blinked rapidly, vision blurring. "Doesn't it?" Boone shook his head. "No, you owe them livin'." Silence rolled over them again, this time heavier, not empty. Mara shifted Jonah to her shoulder, pressing her cheek into his hair, and when she finally spoke, it was barely more than breath. "I don't know how to live without her." Boone stood, boots crunching on pebbles, and offered his hand, not expecting her to take it, just offering space to rise. "Then don't live without her," he said. "Live for him." Mara stared at his outstretched hand before pushing to her feet on her own, not ignoring the gesture, just proving she still could. Boone didn't seem offended. He simply nodded and turned toward the slope, leading deeper into open country. "Come on. Can't stay too long in one place. Trails remember footprints." Mara followed, Jonah bundled close, and though she walked alone, she noticed something new. She no longer felt like she was walking unseen. The land rose into low, rolling hills, scattered with sagebrush and lone cottonwoods, each gust of wind bending their leaves in soft silver waves as Mara and Boone continued along the narrow trail that skirted the foothills. The creek faded behind them until the only sound was gravel crunching beneath boots and Jonah's quiet snuffles against Mara's collar. Hours passed without conflict, and while the silence felt safer than the town, it also left Mara alone with thoughts she'd buried beneath hunger and urgency. Boone walked ahead, leading his horse by the reins, posture relaxed in that way only men accustomed to danger could manage, alert but unafraid. Mara watched his back as she walked, wondering whether safety in the presence of another person was something she deserved, or just borrowed. Her voice finally broke the quiet. "I lied earlier." Boone didn't stop walking, but he slowed enough that the space between them tightened. "About what?" Mara swallowed hard, shifting Jonah higher on her hip. "I didn't try to give him up only because I couldn't feed him. I tried to give him up because I couldn't stand what he reminded me of." Boone stopped then, turning to face her fully, eyes narrowing not with judgment, but with the slow patience of a man who'd heard worse truths than most people could bear. Mara looked away, shame pressing into her ribs like invisible hands. "My sister. She wasn't just gone. She died saving him. She shoved him into my arms and locked herself in that burning cabin to keep the men from taking her. I ran with him. I never ran back." The words spilled out in gasps, like she'd been holding them inside until her bones cracked. Jonah fussed, sensing her trembling. Boone stepped closer, boots scuffing the dirt. "You think running makes you a coward," he said. Mara's voice cracked. "Don't it?" Boone shook his head slowly. "No. Cowards run toward safety. You ran carrying someone else." She blinked, stunned, breath shuddering. The wind picked up, sweeping her hair across her face, almost hiding her expression until she pushed it back again with shaking fingers. "I didn't go back for her," she whispered. "Part of me wanted to, but I didn't." Boone didn't rush to comfort, didn't throw easy forgiveness at her feet. Instead, he knelt slightly so his face met hers on equal ground. "She made a choice," he said, "a heavy one. She trusted you with the only thing she had left. You honor that by living, not by destroying yourself trying to undo what can't be undone." Mara clutched Jonah tighter, tears slipping down her cheeks before she realized she'd let them fall. "Sometimes I think keeping him alive hurts more than losing her did, because I look at him and see the price." Boone's voice softened like leather worn by years of use. "Maybe that means he's worth the price." She stared at him, breath frozen, because no one had ever suggested that grief wasn't punishment, that it could be proof of love. Boone rose to his full height again, looking towards the distant line of dark pines hugging the mountain's edge. "There's an old homestead up ahead," he said. "Roof's broken, walls still hold. We can rest before crossing into higher country." Mara wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, nodding slowly. "You act like you've fixed up a lot of broken places." Boone started walking again. "Only the ones I planned on staying in a while." Mara followed, steps steadier now, Jonah tucked beneath her chin, and as they climbed toward the ruined structure silhouetted against the bright sky, she finally understood something she'd been avoiding since the fire. Running had kept them alive, but truth might be what finally lets them live. The abandoned homestead appeared over the rise like a memory half buried under sunlight, 2 broken walls still standing, roof caved in on the north side, and a splintered door hanging crooked from a single rusted hinge. Mara paused at the edge of the clearing, Jonah stirring awake in her arms, while Boone moved ahead to push aside tall sage that had grown wild around the collapsed porch. The air smelled of old ashes and sun-baked wood. Not tragic, just forgotten. He tested the door with a shove, and the hinge snapped free, the slab falling into the dust with a dull thud that echoed up the hill. "We'll fix that," Boone said, stepping over it like it was nothing. "Wind'll cut through here too easy." Mara followed slowly, eyes sweeping the interior. Burn marks along the beams, wheel ruts fossilized in dry earth. A broken cradle tucked in the corner beneath fallen rafters. She tightened her hold on Jonah instinctively. Boone crouched near the cradle, running a calloused thumb across the charred edge, not prying, just noticing. "Family lived here," he said quietly. "Left in a hurry." Mara exhaled through her teeth. "Or didn't leave together." "Maybe both." Boone stood, brushing dust from his knee, then began setting small things in order, righting a toppled bench, moving loose boards, kicking aside debris to make space, not commanding, not asking permission, just making the place livable for a night. Mara laid Jonah on her shawl near a patch of intact flooring and knelt beside him, adjusting his little hands so he wouldn't scrape splinters. The baby cooed, completely unaware that life had brought him into yet another ruin. Mara whispered, "You deserve walls that don't remember fire," and her voice trembled more than she wanted. Boone heard, though he pretended not to. Instead, he dragged a long support beam upright and wedged it beneath a tilted section of roof, muscles straining until wood creaked back into place. Mara watched him a moment, then asked, "Why'd you really help us back there?" Boone didn't answer immediately. He walked to the doorway, scanning the hills like a man tracking ghosts. "I seen too many people traded when their worth got heavy to carry," he said finally. "Sometimes it's child, sometimes it's woman, sometimes it's a man who don't want to be what others say he is." "You're talking about you," Mara said softly. Boone kept his eyes on the horizon. "I'm talking about everyone who ever walked away before someone sold their story for them." Wind rattled loose shingles, dropping a piece of wood beside Mara. She flinched, then straightened, jaw set. "You talk noble, but you don't tell much." He glanced back at her. "You want my sins or the reasons I got 'em?" Mara hesitated, then shook her head. "I want to know why you didn't walk away when I tried to." Boone shifted his hat back slightly, revealing eyes that held more miles than years. "Because you didn't want to walk away. You just didn't know what else to do." Mara sat back on her heels, unable to look away from him. For a moment, the ruined house felt like confession ground, and she wasn't sure she'd survive telling more. Before either could speak, horse hooves clattered on stone outside, sharp, fast, too coordinated to be wandering travelers. Boone moved in one fluid motion, placing himself between Mara and the open wall, hand hovering near his coat, where a holster lay stitched inside. Mara gathered Jonah close, heartbeat thudding in her throat. Voices drifted up the hill, men laughing, but not joyfully, laughing the way wolves smile before circling. "Town said she took a baby," one voice drawled. "Said some giant fool rode off with her." Another spat. "Long as they didn't change direction, I'll find 'em." Boone's jaw tightened. Mara whispered, "They followed us." Boone didn't look back, but his voice dropped low, steady as iron cooling in water. "You stay behind me. Hold the boy tight." Outside, the riders grew closer, dust rising behind them like a storm gaining shape. Mara braced herself against the broken wall. Jonah tucked beneath her chin, and the truth hit her with terrifying clarity. Mercy wasn't a finish line. It was the first step into a fight harder than survival. The riders reached the clearing in a loose crescent, horses snorting, leather creaking, their shadows stretching long across the broken homestead as the midday sun burned down through the collapsed roof. Mara pressed herself against the rear wall, Jonah tucked beneath her shawl, while Boone stepped forward into open daylight, feet planted shoulder-wide, hands relaxed at his sides. Unarmed, but only in the way a storm looks harmless until it breaks. The lead rider, a wiry man with a narrow face and a badge that looked borrowed rather than earned, tipped his hat with a smirk that never reached his eyes. "Well now," he drawled, "town said the girl ran off with stolen property and a fool big enough to die for it." Boone didn't blink. "Boy ain't property." The man clicked his tongue. "Everything's property if someone claims it first." His gaze slid toward the homestead opening, where Mara's silhouette barely showed through the warped boards. "And she ain't the rightful guardian. Baby's worth coin if returned to the right hands, worth more if sold quiet." Mara tightened her grip until her fingers ached, shame crashing over her again like a wave she'd just learned to breathe through. Boone stepped one pace forward, blocking their line of sight. "You came this far? Say what you want." The men shifted in their saddles, uneasy, not frightened, just aware that something about Boone felt wrong to push. The leader lifted his chin. "We're taking the boy. Girl can walk or can swing, don't matter." Boone's expression didn't change, but the air did, went still, like even the wind leaned closer to listen. "You'll leave," he said quietly. The leader barked a laugh. "You alone?" Boone shook his head once. "Nobody alone here." At first Mara thought he meant himself, some poetic statement about her presence. But then she heard soft movement behind the boulder ridge to the west. A hunting call, short and low, answered by another. The riders stiffened. The leader scowled. "You bring the tribes into this?" Boone shrugged. "This land belongs to them. You rode in with threats. I just happened to be standing here." A second rider cursed under his breath. "He's bluffing." But then a figure stepped from the rocks, slim, composed, braid over her shoulder, bow relaxed in her grip. Tansa. She didn't speak, didn't draw, didn't threaten. She simply existed in full daylight, eyes on the leader. Calm as someone who had already calculated every way he could die if he made the wrong choice. Another warrior appeared further up the ridge, and a third beside the creek bed. No war paint, no raised weapons, just silent authority. The leader's smirk dissolved. "We came to take what's ours," he said, voice cracking like a board under too much weight. Tansa's voice cut through the clearing, soft but sharp. "Then you came to the wrong ground. Your law stops where your fear begins." Boone didn't take his eyes off the men. "She ain't handing the boy over, and you ain't dragging her back." The leader's gaze darted between them, calculating odds, pride warring with survival. "You think you can protect him?" Boone finally met the man's stare fully. "No. I think they don't need protecting. Just someone to stand so they don't have to stand alone." The words hit harder than threats. The leader spat into the dirt. "Town'll hear about this." "Good," Boone replied. "Let 'em know she ain't for sale, and the boy ain't either." Slowly, the men turned their horses, not out of respect, but out of the ancient instinct that keeps predators alive when they realize they aren't the apex they imagined. When the clearing emptied, dust settling in long, ghostly trails, Mara sagged forward against the wall, breath shaking, Jonah wriggling in her arms. Boone finally turned toward her, voice low. "They'll come back. Maybe with law. Maybe with fire." Mara swallowed hard. "Then why stay? You owe me nothing." Boone stepped closer, stopping just short of touching distance. "I didn't stay for debt. I stayed because you chose the boy even when it broke you. That matters." Tansa approached from the ridge, setting down her bow. "You cannot run forever," she said. "So choose what ground you bleed for." Mara looked between them, one fierce with history, one steady with wounds, and realized that for the first time since the fire, she had people willing to stand at her front instead of watching her back. And that meant staying was suddenly more terrifying than running, because it offered something she might not be strong enough to lose again. Night never came. Not because the sun refused to set, but because Boone refused to stop moving until shadows couldn't trap them. They didn't head back toward town or onto the main trail. Instead, they cut across the shallow ridges that lined the mountain's spine, walking through thin pines and dry grass that hissed beneath their boots. Mara kept Jonah pressed to her chest, while Boone led ahead, scanning the land with the instinct of someone who'd been hunted enough times to know where ambushes live. Tansa traveled beside them in silence, not guarding or following, but moving like someone who had chosen their fate and expected them to match it. They reached a narrow canyon crossing, a natural stone bridge suspended above a dry ravine where wind whistled like distant wolves. Boone paused, placing his palm on the rock. "Below is a choke point. If they come, they'll try to pin us there." Mara swallowed hard, throat tight. "You think they're still coming?" "Men who leave angry don't stay gone," Boone said, eyes narrowing. "Men who leave humiliated ride until pride catches up." He motioned them across, but Mara hesitated at the edge of the drop, knees trembling. Heights didn't scare her. Falling while holding Jonah did. The wind kicked up, pulling her shawl loose. She backed away from the ledge, heart hammering. Boone noticed instantly. "Give him to me," he said, holding out his arms. Mara shook her head, clutching the baby tighter. "No, I can do it." "Being strong don't mean you bleed alone," Boone said. "Sometimes it means letting someone else carry what matters most." The words cracked something old and brittle inside her, something built from months of holding too much by herself. She stepped forward slowly, placing Jonah into Boone's arms. The moment she let go, her body felt both lighter and terrifyingly empty, like she'd handed over the last proof she still had a purpose. Boone held the baby against his chest, one massive hand supporting his weight as if Jonah weighed no more than breath. Tansa crossed first, light-footed, scanning the horizon. Boone followed, boots steady, Jonah cradled protectively against him. Mara stepped onto the bridge, legs shaking, but kept her eyes forward, breathing slow. Halfway across, hooves thundered behind them, distant but closing fast. Men shouted, metal clattered. Mara froze. Boone didn't turn, didn't shout, didn't panic. He just stopped, pivoted toward her, and extended his hand across the last stretch of rock. "Come to me," he said, voice deep and calm. "No running, no falling, just come." Mara pushed forward, the world narrowing to the grip she reached for. She placed her hand in his, and Boone pulled her the final step just as riders crested the ridge behind them, silhouettes sharp against the sky. The lead man raised his rifle, aiming straight across the canyon. "End of the line, girl," he shouted, voice echoing. "Give us the boy and we'll let you walk." Tansa stepped in front of Boone and Mara, drawing an arrow, but didn't fire. Boone shifted Jonah behind his body, shielding him with his own bulk. Mara glanced back at the canyon gap. They couldn't run. They couldn't cross again. They couldn't fight without risking the baby. The riders spread along the ridge, confident distance made them gods. The leader cocked the hammer. "Count to 3, he barked. "Then we take him." Boone didn't raise his hands. Instead, he spoke loud enough for wind and stone to carry it back across the gap. "You ain't taking a child, you're taking a grave." The leader spat. "He ain't yours." Boone stepped forward, eyes blazing. "He is now." The canyon held its breath. Even the horses went still. For the first time, Mara felt something shift inside her. Not just fear, not just gratitude. Something like belonging, or the first step toward it. And as the wind howled between them like the space between two worlds, she realized the bridge beneath her wasn't just stone. It was the line between the life she'd run from and the one she might finally choose to stay for. The standoff didn't end with gunfire, but with something stranger: hesitation. The riders on the far ridge held their rifles aimed, waiting for Mara to break, for Boone to flinch, for fear to make the decision easier. Yet nothing moved except wind dragging grit across stone. Eventually the leader clicked his tongue, spit into the dust, and motioned his men back, not in surrender, but in warning. "This ain't over," he shouted, his voice thinning in the wind. "Law's comin', and paper speaks louder than guns." They rode off, dust trailing behind them like a ragged banner, leaving the canyon bridge suddenly too quiet. Mara collapsed to her knees, breath tearing from her chest, not crying, not yet, but stunned by how close the world had come to ending. Boone handed Jonah back to her gently, the infant now asleep. Unaware of the price paid around him. "We cross into town," Boone said after a long silence. "Not the one behind us? The trading post on the North Trail. They know me there." Mara looked up sharply. "You want to walk into a settlement after this?" Tansa tightened her braid, eyes scanning the horizon. "Hiding invites hunters. Truth stops them at the gate." Mara shook her head. "Truth got us here." "Truth unspoken got you here," Tansa corrected. "Not the truth you stand on." Boone started down the slope, leading them toward a narrow trail cut between towering pines, shadows cool and sharp beneath midday sun. For the first time since dawn, Mara noticed how exhaustion pressed into her bones. Days of travel, nights of fleeing, months of grief. She followed anyway, because nothing was worse than being found running again. By late afternoon, they reached the trading post. A wide dirt yard lined with wagons, barrels of feed, water troughs, a smithy, and a long porch where half a dozen townsfolk sat shelling beans or smoking pipes. Conversation stuttered to a halt when Boone walked in with Mara and the baby behind him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't ask permission. He simply stepped into the open and said, "Name's Boone. I'm claiming guardianship for this child and standing with the woman who carries him. Any man got claim otherwise can speak now." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was calculation. Everyone there had seen disputes, land deeds, broken marriages, orphan claims. But no one had heard a man announce responsibility not through ownership, but through presence. An older woman stepped forward from the porch, wiping flour from her hands, gray streaking her dark hair. "You making a marriage claim?" Boone shook his head. "No." Murmurs rippled. Mara's throat tightened. He looked at her then, not with distance, but with careful intent. "This ain't about ownership," he continued. "It's about standin'. Boy needs family. She already chose him. I'm choosing both." The old woman studied him, gaze sharp. "That's a harder vow than marriage. Marriage can break. Stand and don't." Boone nodded once. Mara felt heat sting her eyes, not because she needed saving, but because he didn't twist her into needing him to justify staying. One of the porch men finally spoke up. "You ain't law." Boone didn't waver. "Law comes when someone tells it not to." Another man leaned forward, pipe dangling. "Town'll want paperwork." Tansa stepped up beside Boone, voice even. "Some families write blood on paper. Others write it in who they protect." Silence stretched again. Then the old woman nodded, slow and sure. "If you stand, I stand witness." She placed her palm on Mara's shoulder, grounding her like stone roots. Child stays with them. Community recognizes it. Whoever disputes can take it to council. And just like that, without ceremony, without marriage, without permission, belonging settled around them like a cloak newly placed on shoulders that had been bare too long. Mara swallowed hard, looking at Boone through a blur of tears she didn't try to hide. "You sure?" she whispered. Boone met her gaze with quiet strength. "I don't take steps I ain't willing to carry." And for the first time, Jonah's future wasn't something she feared losing. It was something she feared not being strong enough to receive. The trading post returned to its ordinary hum by late afternoon. Wagons creaking, horses drinking at the trough, merchants tallying grain. And though no official papers were signed, something heavier had settled into place. A silent, communal agreement that Mara, Jonah, and Boone now stood together. Yet peace rarely holds its breath long. As the sun dipped lower, painting the yard in copper light, a solitary wagon rolled into view from the north road, burned on one side, canvas torn, axle repaired hastily with rawhide strips. Mara went still the moment she saw it, knees threatening to give, because she recognized the scorch marks like a signature carved in terror. It was her sister's wagon, or what remained of it. Boone noticed her tremble and stepped closer, not touching her, just anchoring. Tansa shifted her bow higher on her shoulder. Eyes narrowing, the wagon slowed to a halt, and a gaunt man climbed down, hair unkempt, cheeks hollowed, clothes stained with soot and travel. At first glance he looked desperate, at second glance, dangerous. His eyes found Mara with a jolt of shock, then narrowed with bitterness. "You lived," he said flatly. Mara's breath hitched. "Dawson." The man's voice cracked, not with grief, but resentment aged into bone. "I went back after the fire. Thought maybe you pulled her out. They said a woman with a baby ran east." Mara tightened her grip on Jonah as the baby squirmed. "There was no time," she whispered. "You know that." "I know you left her," Dawson snapped. A whisper of movement rippled through onlookers. Every conflict draws an audience. Boone stepped slightly in front of Mara, weight shifting, shoulders broad like a fortress. "You know him?" he asked quietly. Mara nodded, voice trembling. "My sister's husband." The words hit harder than a gunshot. The man's gaze flicked to Boone, hostile. "And who are you? Another man she's clinging to?" Boone didn't rise to it. "Name's Boone. I'm standing with her and the boy." Dawson stepped forward sharply. "That boy's mine." Mara shook her head, tears burning. "You weren't there. You weren't with her when she screamed. You weren't with us when we ran. You vanished." Dawson's face twisted. "I went for help. You ran the other way." "I carried your son," she shot back. "Where were you when the world tried to kill him?" Dawson's jaw clenched. "I was burying my wife." Silence cracked across the yard like a whip. Boone's voice dropped low. "You here to take him?" Dawson looked at Jonah, really looked, and pain flickered beneath anger. "I came because I didn't know if he was alive," he murmured. "I came because I thought she might be too." Mara crumpled onto the porch rail, Jonah clutching her collarbone. "She saved him," Mara whispered. "She locked herself in that house so they couldn't burn him too." Dawson's face shattered. Not with rage, but something far more dangerous. Grief finally given something to break against. He sank to his knees in the dirt, hands in his hair, body shaking. "I wasn't there," he rasped. "God help me, I wasn't there." The town watched, not judging, not intervening. Boone rested a hand on Mara's back, not claiming, just steady. Tansa knelt beside Dawson, placing a small, smooth stone at his feet. "Grief runs in circles," she said softly. You can walk it forever, or step out? Dawson looked up, eyes red. I don't deserve to hold him, Mara swallowed. Neither did I, until I stopped running. Boone stepped back, giving the moment space. Jonah reached toward Dawson with tiny fingers, babbling nonsense like an invitation. The man choked on breath, tears falling into dust. If you want him, Dawson whispered, voice broken, you raise him. Just don't let him forget she loved him first. Mara nodded, tears streaming. I won't. Dawson rose slowly, not redeemed, not forgiven, but unburdened enough to turn away. As he climbed back onto the ruined wagon, Boone whispered, You could stay. Dawson shook his head. I ain't strong enough to watch a life I didn't earn. And with that, he rolled back down the road, the wagon shrinking into twilight. Mara buried her face in Jonah's hair, Boone's hand steady on her shoulder, and for the first time, her past didn't feel like chains, just something that finally stopped chasing her. The next morning broke clear and bright, sunlight spilling across the trading post yard in long, calm strokes, turning dust into soft gold and warming the boards beneath Mara's bare feet as she stepped onto the porch with Jonah bundled in her arms. The night had brought no riders, no lawmen, no shouts, only sleep heavy enough to feel like the first she'd earned in months. Boone sat beside the trough, sharpening an axe handle, sleeves rolled up, arms moving slow and deliberate, as if shaping wood could shape the future too. Tansa crouched near the fire pit, coaxing embers into flame to boil water for herbs. She worked with the peaceful efficiency of someone who had already decided to stay just long enough to ensure no new wounds formed before the old ones finished healing. Mara watched them both and felt something unfamiliar settle behind her ribs. Not safety, not yet, but permission to imagine it. She carried Jonah down the steps, letting his tiny hand brush the railing as they walked. Boone looked up, eyes softening like he'd been waiting for her without admitting it. We'll need supplies before heading out, he said. Mountain paths get steep, nights colder. Mara nodded, but her voice caught. You still plan on us going with you? Boone leaned his forearms on his knees. I don't plan on anyone. I just make room. Jonah reached for Boone again, fingers curling, and Boone let the baby catch hold of his thumb, large hand nearly swallowing the tiny gesture. Mara sank onto the lower step, staring out at the open pasture and distant mountains rising like silent witnesses. What if I mess up again? She whispered. What if I break something that's supposed to heal? Boone tapped the axe handle against the step, not unkindly. You will, he said. So will I. That's how families get made. They break and put each other back together. Mara blinked rapidly as the wind swept her hair across her cheek. I never thought I'd get a family without losing another. Boone turned to face her fully. You didn't lose one. You carried it here. Tansa approached, setting a clay cup beside Mara, steam curling upward. The world took your sister, she said, but you kept her story, and now the boy carries both. Mara ran her hand down Jonah's back, breathing deeply. I don't know where to go from here. Boone stood, tightening his saddle strap. Then stay long enough to find out. She looked up sharply. Stay where? Boone glanced toward the mountain slope beyond the meadow, where pine trees stood like sentinels, and a narrow trail wound upward toward unseen valleys. There's an old cabin up past the ridge. Mine once. Haven't touched it since I stopped expecting anyone to knock. Mara rose slowly, heart thudding. And now? Boone met her eyes with quiet certainty. Now I ain't expectin'. I'm askin'. The trading post faded around them, not literally, but in importance, as if the world had shrunk to a single choice waiting to be spoken. Mara looked down at Jonah, then at Boone, then at the trail disappearing into sunlight. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of finally deciding instead of fleeing. "I'll come," she whispered. "Not because I need you, but because maybe we need each other." Boone nodded once, as though he'd already known. Tansa smiled faintly and began packing herbs. Jonah babbled and reached toward the sunrise, like it was something he recognized. And together, with no ceremony and no witnesses but the land itself, they started walking toward the ridge, 3 people bound not by blood or law, but by the simple choice to stand in the same story. Some families are born, some are chosen, and some are built from the ashes of people who refused to let loss have the final word. If you were Mara, would you dare start a new life on the mountain, or walk away before it could hurt you again? Like, share, and subscribe to Redemption West, where every broken life deserves a place to begin again.